Okay, as anticipated, we have about 10, 15 minutes for questions. So I'm going to have all of the speakers come back up. Does anyone have any questions, comments, or thoughts for any of the speakers? No? None? There we go. Actually, we are recording the session, so could you step up to the mic?
Hello, I'm Erwan Floch. I come from France, Paris. I do a lot of trainings in Algeria, and I can confirm that people do not know very well about impact factor, journalists, and quite far from your club, the Club of Society Scholarly Publishing. One question is the price of APC, which hasn't been, for me, Mr. Crotty, you mentioned a little bit, but I think this is also one of the first need. It's simply maybe estimated too expensive to publish, and I'm not so sure that researchers in a lot of countries do plan this kind of budget. So this is an aspect which has not been, to me, very much developed. So I would like to know what you think about those price of APC, because many predatory journals is a consequence of too high price of APC. Thank you.
I can see everyone's rushing to answer that one. Merci beaucoup. So I think I understand the point you're making, and I think that there is a correlation between the price of APCs and the rejection rates of journals. If you're going to accept everything that's submitted and you don't do any work at all, then maybe you can do that for $50. I think that has to be taken into consideration, that we've already heard this morning that many of the predatory journals are just not putting the work in, and so that's why they don't need to charge as much. Having said that, I've seen some sort of fairly well-known predatory journals that also have quite high APCs, and so it's not just that predatory publishers are cheap.
Yeah, I'll just add, there's a, you get what you pay for aspect to this, but there are other alternatives for researchers who don't have funds. I mean, this is a problem with gold open access, period, not just predatory journals, is that it shuts out researchers who can't afford to pay an APC. But there are a lot of subscription journals out there that charge absolutely nothing. There are a lot of good journals that offer waivers of APCs, very generous and broad waiver programs. And there are a lot of what are called diamond open access journals that don't charge the author at all. So there are a lot of alternatives out there that hopefully just a lack of funds shouldn't drive someone into this if you have legitimate research that can stand up to legitimate review. But I think there is some attractiveness in there of, I can't afford a $3,000 APC, but this one's only $50. So, but again, it comes down to this sort of knowledge of what you're paying for.
Knowledge of what journals are available, and speaking from an Indian perspective, where India, Asia get caught up in a lot of these predatory journals, it is a function of cost. I absolutely agree with that. It's also a function of knowledge of what journals are out there and all the transparency of that there is the difference between APC charges, and there are journals that have very low cost of entry if in fact you're a legitimate publication. It's a lot of things. I'll wear my other hat now, and many of you are aware that I've also been pushing the Coalition for Responsible Publication Resources, which is not only on the publishing side of things, but on the author services side. There's a lot of predatory author services out there, translation companies who are selling papers out the back door. The whole peer review scams are protected by author services companies, and so there's a lot of things that we need to tackle, and I'm glad that everybody is taking a full concerted approach at it. One change, because I've been listening to the narrative for several years, so one change in the narrative that I pick up on this panel is the concept that I agree with, that it is actually there are many complicit authors in predatory publishing, and and this is a slight change in the narrative, that we're agreeing and we believe and we understand that the authors are choosing this as a legitimate publishing resource for whatever reason. And one of the things that concerns me is the legitimization, and we'll probably talk about Sci-Hub and other things, but the normalization of predatory or irresponsible conduct is becoming really concerning for me. I was at the recent UKSG meeting, 1,000 librarians and publishers in the room, and I asked openly how many people tried to block Sci-Hub, and 3 people raised their hand. I asked how many people in this room think blocking Sci-Hub would be a good idea. And 1 person raised their hand. And that's pretty scary, because that defines normalization of irresponsible behavior. And once we cross that path, it's all downhill from there. And so all these activities need to build the wall to ensure that these things are not normalized.
Yeah, I'll just add, a couple of the things we've seen recently, there are companies in China that, you pay them a fee and they'll promise to get your paper into a particular journal, some of which actually try to get it into that journal and set up these sort of, peer review scams with fake reviewers suggested with fake email addresses, things like that. There's another one that I think they're still doing it. They claim to have a partnership with a bunch of OUP journals, legitimate, and they have our journals and the descriptions and pictures of them, and say, so submit your paper to that journal through us, and then we'll accept it, you'll pay us the fee, and then it will be published in that journal, which, we get emails from authors saying, where's my accepted article? And we've never seen that article, what are you talking about? So there's a lot of sort of complicated little scams going on all over the place.
Rachel, you mentioned, I think it was you that mentioned the Think, Check, Submit initiative. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? And also, in what way can publishers help to promote and kind of disseminate information about that?
Yes, I noticed since I mentioned that actually that it's been tweeted a little bit by, in fact, by others on the panel, so they might want to add to this. It's an initiative that launched about, does anybody know? It's maybe 2 years ago?
September 2 years ago.
Okay, so there's a lot more qualified people than me to comment on this, but it is something that it launched and then it sort of went a bit quiet recently, and actually I think it's time to sort of bring it to prominence a bit more. So the reason I mentioned it is because that's something that we want to do as a publisher, and it's really, if you look at the website, then it really is a checklist for authors of things that they should be thinking about before they submit to journals. And so it's just one initiative, but I think it is a good way of educating researchers about what do you need to check before you submit. Because I get the impression, certainly from the amount of papers that we have to reject and refer to another journal, that sometimes people are just submitting to journals without actually even understanding what the scope and aims of the journal are. I mean, just completely random submissions. And so this is all about saying not just avoid predatory publishers, but also just make sure that you are submitting to the most appropriate journal. But others might want to add to that.
Yeah, the website that I showed that I developed, I was focusing on the tab about what is a predatory publisher, but the main tab of that guide is choosing a publication venue, and I do include the Think, Check, Submit tool there. Under the idea that for every 2 or 3 students who contact me directly and say, how can I figure out what journal I should submit my research to, there are 100 more who have the same question but don't think to ask or don't know the right person to ask. And so I do think that libraries are including pages like that on their websites more and more, as they are realizing that that is an area of need and outreach for students. So I'm happy to support Think, Check, Submit on our website. I think it's a great initiative.
Hi, I'm Mary Summerfield from SPIE. We're a scholarly society that does a lot of conferences as well as publishing. And Hillary, do you talk to people about, there are predatory conferences out there as far as we're concerned, and I get emails from it every week like the
yeah.
journals and what, and people seem to be quite oblivious, even some of our senior researchers who are, leaders of our society, and I point out to them, look at this, look at these factors, they'll say, oh, I never thought about that.
Yeah.
And, they get themselves roped into being leaders of these meetings just because they're in Cyprus. That would be nice in January, whatever. And what do you tell scholars?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was originally thinking I would include conferences in this presentation, but it was already way too long. But I think that is an area where the concept of predation is growing. There was actually an article in the New York Times about this, maybe a few months ago, about how these conferences, and conferences are can be big money-making endeavors for an organization that's not actually putting a lot of effort into providing a good quality experience, so you charge a high registration fee and get people to come or participate in organizational ways. And and in certain disciplines like engineering and computer science, the conference is the main way of communicating information. They don't, the journal article is kind of secondary to presenting and publishing in conference proceedings. So I think those disciplines are particularly vulnerable to predatory conferences, for sure. So I do definitely, talk about that with folks as well.
Hello, Philip Purnell from Knowledge E. I'm based in Dubai in the Middle East. We translated the Think, Check, Submit initiative into Arabic because a lot of people rely on lists like this, of checklists of where to publish, because their journals are not indexed in the international systems because they're not in English. We've now worked on a kind of sister project called Think, Check, Attend, and we sent it to the organizers of Think, Check, Submit to see if they'd be interested in publishing that too.
Cool. Yeah.
Did you get any response?
Not yet.
Not yet.
I'll be looking for them here at this point.
Hi, Marie McVeigh, Taylor and Francis. Does this continue to raise the barrier for new journals, new conferences, for emerging fields where, if there's always been that, how do you establish reputation? And now when there is a fundamental erosion of the criteria to establish reputation, does that make the barrier higher?
I would say that, yes, it does. So, as we know, the Directory of Open Access Journals, maybe a year or so ago, revised their criteria for inclusion, and a lot of journals didn't make the cut. And I think that was done in part to address some of the issues of, making sure that journals reached a certain bar. But it does raise that bar higher for truly legitimate journals that are just starting out that want to be included in DOAJ, which is, a great stamp of approval of quality. And there are many good quality newer journals that aren't in DOAJ because they don't meet the criteria for whatever, they don't assign DOIs or whatever the criteria are that they don't meet. But so I do think that it's more challenging for newer journals that have truly legitimate purposes to gain a good reputation. Yeah.
But that's, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. We want a high bar. But what we're calling for is transparency, and do what you say you're doing. And to be considered a legitimate journal, there are some basic standards for that. I didn't get into my talk, but I like the idea of I like having Cabell's involved as a neutral third-party monitor, but I still think there are issues with the whitelist and the blacklist, as it takes a huge amount of time to monitor. The Indian group has 38,000 journals. How often are they checking each of those journals? I think there are ways to automate it. I think there are services like no one has mentioned, peer review evaluation, which AAAS has, which sort of tries to hook into a journal's submission system and behind the scenes receive reports to verify that, yes, actual peer review is going on. Are there ways we can just automate this as part of, this is part of running a legitimate journal, that there is some neutral third party that, like having a DOI, or for a researcher having an ORCID ID, that we have some background automation of, yes, we are actually doing what we are saying we're doing. And I think that may be an approach that that ends up working, you know, in conjunction with the really easy to check whitelist and blacklist.
Kathleen, go ahead. I was going to ask if you wanted anything to add.
I think that we can automate some of the process, but a lot of what we're doing when we're reviewing journals is contacting people and making sure that they actually are on this editorial board, and they what kind of experience they had with peer review, and what kind of peer review they did, and that kind of thing. So it's not easy to automate something where you actually have to talk to people.
Yeah, and plus the people you talk to, I mean, if you're an author in that journal, you probably have an interest in saying, oh, it was very rigorously peer, you know, whether it was or not. So,
Right,
so
but
it's
there
just
is room
yeah.
for automation in some of it.
No, I think a combination of approaches are the way to go.
I wasn't sure I was going to make the comment, but I'll just add on to Marie's and other things that are said, that I used to argue with Jeffrey all the time about the fact that based upon his original criteria or thereabouts, no new journal would ever be able to launch, because any journal needs to launch and, quite honestly, market the heck out of their journal and need to outreach to authors and do all kinds of things. Now, some journals may go over the edge, so to speak, and others may be contained, but I do like the criteria that do you do what you profess that you say you do. I mean, that's the fundamental that really is the dividing line. So even if someone is marketing the heck out of their journal, they are not predator because they are doing what they say they're doing, and the rest is just marketing.
Yeah, no, it's the idea of deception rather than predation.
And when we set up our criteria, we specifically made it to where we would not add low quality and new journals to our list just because they're low quality or new. That was something that was very important to us, because these journals have a place. We need them. Not every journal can be in the top 10%. So the journals on our list are the ones that are actually predatory. They're not just inexperienced.
I'm tempted to quote Garrison Keillor: all journals are above average. All right. Well, just a little bit above average. All right. Well, I'd like to thank our panel. This has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much.